Zimbabwe and China have just sealed another big deal, a cooperation agreement worth $55 million, with an additional $6.9 million in food aid added on top. But to understand why this matters, and why both Harare and Beijing are investing so heavily in each other, you need to know the story behind this relationship. It's a story of history, politics, trade, and survival, and one that stretches back decades. The $55 million deal and what it means. On August 6, 2025, in Harare, President Emmerson Mnangagwa personally observed the signing of two agreements between Zimbabwe and the People's Republic of China. The first was the Economic and Technical Cooperation Agreement, valued at about $55 million. The second was the exchange letters for emergency assistance, which provided $6.9 million worth of food aid. These were not symbolic gestures. The $55 million deal was designed to promote socio-economic development, enhance food security, and support targeted projects that would directly improve the lives of vulnerable communities in Zimbabwe. The food aid package, meanwhile, was meant to ease some of the immediate pressures faced by families hit hard by food shortages. This showed that the partnership between the two nations wasn't only about building giant infrastructure or mining ventures, it was also about directly addressing human needs. The road to August 2025. The roots of this cooperation stretch back years. In 2024, President Mnangagwa made a state visit to Beijing, where he signed multiple agreements in sectors like agriculture, mining, and infrastructure. Chinese President Xi Jinping, during that visit, emphasized his intention to deepen ties with Zimbabwe in areas such as investment, trade, clean energy, and the digital economy. That trip was important. It set the stage for what happened in 2025, and it connected to a much longer history of China-Zimbabwe relations, one that began during the liberation struggle of the late 1970s, a partnership forged in war and independence. Back in January 1979, during the Rhodesian Bush War, Robert Mugabe was looking for allies. The Soviet Union was already backing Joshua Nkomo's Zimbabwe African People's Union with weapons. Mugabe's attempts to gain Soviet support for his own movement, the Zimbabwe African National Union, failed. Instead, he turned to Beijing. That January, Mugabe met with Chinese officials in Mozambique, and both sides pledged closer cooperation. When Zimbabwe became independent on April 18, 1980, the two nations formally established diplomatic ties that very day. Only 2 months later, Zimbabwe's Foreign Minister, Simon Muzenda, visited Beijing to express thanks. In 1981, Mugabe himself followed with a visit of his own. From the very beginning, Mugabe placed enormous importance on his country's relationship with China. Mugabe's Look East policy. By 2003, Zimbabwe had entered a bitter standoff with the European Union, which imposed sanctions after disputed elections. The result was capital flight and an economic downturn. Mugabe responded with what became known as the Look East policy. Officially, this policy was about expanding ties with countries like Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, India, and Russia. In practice, though, China became the centerpiece. Beijing's policy of non-interference in internal affairs, especially on sensitive issues like human rights, made it a natural partner for Harare. Mugabe himself traveled to China repeatedly. By 2006, he had already visited 11 times. His 12th and 13th visits came in 2010 and 2011. His final trip to China was in August 2014. But even while Mugabe was leaning heavily on Beijing, China sometimes held back. In 2007, for instance, Chinese President Hu Jintao visited several southern African countries, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, and Zambia, but skipped Zimbabwe entirely. Analysts at the time, including reports cited by the South African-based Institute for Security Studies, said China preferred to focus on oil-rich countries, which seemed more strategically important. Missteps and unease. Despite Mugabe's enthusiasm, relations had their awkward moments. Around 2007, when a group of Chinese businessmen visited Zimbabwe, the tourism authority mistakenly put up welcome signs in Korean. Officials later admitted the mistake and promised to hire Chinese translators to prevent a repeat. On the ground, Zimbabweans often expressed mixed feelings about China's growing presence. Complaints about the poor quality of Chinese imports, such as buses, became common. Nyasha Chikwinye, speaking for the ZANU-PF Women's League, accused Chinese traders of fueling the black market trade in foreign currency and called for arrests. At the same time, robberies targeting Chinese businessmen were on the rise, underlining the tensions. The transition to Mnangagwa. When Robert Mugabe was deposed in the 2017 coup, Emmerson Mnangagwa took over as provisional president. His relationship with Beijing has been described as close, though not without challenges. In 2018, Zimbabwe and China signed a comprehensive strategic partnership, formally upgrading their ties. By 2022, Beijing had gifted Harare a new parliament building and a modern conference center symbolic of both China's generosity and its influence. And by the time Mnangagwa traveled to Beijing in 2024, it was clear that the two countries were moving toward even deeper cooperation. The $55 million agreement of 2025 was simply the latest chapter. Trade and economics. Trade between Zimbabwe and China has surged over the past 2 decades. In 2023, trade grew by 29.9%, reaching $3.12 billion, according to official trade data. The growth was largely driven by Zimbabwe's exports of minerals and tobacco, commodities highly sought after in China. According to the International Trade Center, flows were projected to rise to $3.8 billion in 2024, another 23.9% increase. For Zimbabwe, this trade lifeline has been essential at a time when Western sanctions have restricted access to other markets. China has also invested heavily in Zimbabwean industries. It has become the biggest buyer of Zimbabwean tobacco and a major partner in mining and agriculture. In 2015, China accounted for 74% of Zimbabwe's foreign direct investment, the largest share by far. But the relationship has often been lopsided. In the first half of 2007, Zimbabwe ran up a $189 million trade deficit with China, exporting only $16 million worth of goods in return. Military and infrastructure support. The partnership also has a military dimension. Since 2004, Zimbabwe has purchased significant hardware from China, including a $13 million radar system, 6 Hongdu JL-8 jet aircraft, 12 JF-17 Thunder fighters, and 100 military vehicles. China has been central to Zimbabwe's infrastructure projects as well. In November 2007, the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe bought agricultural equipment from several countries, with most of it coming from the People's Republic of China. Zimbabwe's road motor services also purchased nearly 100 trucks from Camco International, a Chinese manufacturer. Development finance has flowed steadily. From 2000 to 2012, at least 128 Chinese projects were identified in Zimbabwe. These included a $670 million loan to expand the Kariba Hydroelectric Dam, a $500 million deal to support cotton production, and financing agreements to supply farmers with new machinery. In 2016, China forgave $40 million of Zimbabwe's debt. Political alignment on the global stage. Zimbabwe has often backed China on major global issues. In June 2020, it was one of 53 countries that supported Beijing's Hong Kong national security law at the United Nations. Moves like this reflect the depth of political alignment between the two governments. For Harare, China's foreign policy of non-intervention has been especially valuable. Unlike Western governments, Beijing does not link aid or investment to conditions on governance or human rights. This principle has made China an attractive ally for Zimbabwe's leaders, regardless of international criticism. Looking at the big picture, the $55 million cooperation agreement and $6.9 million food aid deal in 2025 are just the latest steps in a long and evolving relationship. From Mugabe's wartime alliance with Beijing in 1979 to Mnangagwa's state visit in 2024 and the signing ceremony in Harare in 2025, the ties between the two nations have been shaped by both necessity and strategy. China sees Zimbabwe as a key partner in Africa, a source of resources like platinum and tobacco, and an ally in global forums. Zimbabwe, meanwhile, sees China as a lifeline, a partner willing to provide investment, development aid, and political support at times when the West has turned its back. So, what does all this mean for the future? The latest agreements suggest that Zimbabwe will continue to lean heavily on Beijing for support. Trade is growing, investment is flowing, political ties remain strong. Yet challenges still exist: trade imbalances, tensions over Chinese influence in the local economy, and questions about the long-term stability of Zimbabwe's politics. For now, though, the $55 million cooperation deal shows just how important the relationship has become. But what do you think? Does this kind of partnership secure Zimbabwe's future? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.